Good afternoon. Welcome back after the break. The first speaker now is Professor Divya Nair from IIT Delhi. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Material Science and Engineering. She did her PhD at IIT Delhi in chemistry and then went on to do postdoc at TU Darmstadt in Germany. After that, she spent a brief time in IIT Kharagpur and now she's back at IIT Delhi. Today, she will talk about the macroscopic processes explained by the microscopic events and the role of high-performance computing in it. Okay. So on to you, Professor Nair.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the introduction. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me on this platform in this workshop to interact with everyone and giving me this opportunity to present some of the work that we are currently doing. Today, I'm going to present some of our current findings on how we can actually examine processes related to macromolecular conformation and equilibria in various chemical environments and how HPC can be really helpful in performing such simulations. So in my group, we work with molecular dynamics simulations, and we are interested to look at the atomistic view or microscopic view of different processes that underlie how biomolecules collapse in an environment or attain certain self-assembled structures, and how some kind of polymers, they also respond to the chemical environment, which are also called stimuli responsive polymers. And we try to understand what are the microscopic mechanisms underlying such processes. And HPC plays a very important role. So, for example, in this slide, you can see on the first illustration that you can see, it's actually the cover of a very interesting book which is followed for biomolecular modeling and simulation. So here it shows how we actually prepare a mathematical model as an input for our simulations, where we kind of model the different kind of interactions between the atoms of those molecules. And here they are modeling DNA actually. And once you have the monomers and the basic constituents, you can actually model a chain of DNA, which is a double-strand helix. And then you can actually do certain kind of simulations, or try to solve those algorithms using certain solve those mathematical equations using certain algorithms in simulations. And what you get is actually supercoiled DNA on the right hand side that you can see. Is actually what the picture is trying to say is that simulations can act as a very powerful tool with minimalistic information about the basic constituents of certain processes or certain molecules. We can actually look into how these processes actually happen in say, natural systems or in natural processes. And here, along with this model, we actually then make use of theory. There's some kind of a theoretical background to prepare a model or to understand a research problem. Sometimes we use theory to assess the models that we prepare for our simulations, and sometimes we use theories to actually understand some research problems in simulations. And what enables this understanding is actually the high-performance computing, which I will talk about today also, and show you how it can be a very powerful tool, and what we can sometimes also call it as a computational microscope, because it really helps in understanding processes where experiments sometimes cannot explain. And what finally we get is this microscopic view of, say, this is just a glass of water, or so you can say a solution, where you can actually zoom in and see what happens in such processes. So previously I was at IIT Kharagpur Center for Computational and Data Sciences, where we were installing this Param series of, so under the National Supercomputing Mission, the government is installing Param series at different institutes. And this is a 1.3 petaflop facility that we had started. And the work that I'm going to present today has made use of facilities at IIT Kharagpur and IIT Delhi. At IIT Delhi, we have a 2 petaflop of computing power. And that was just to give you an overview of how the facilities in India are. And now coming to the research problem. So in our group, we are interested to understand how we can actually use the ideas of nature and design new materials with novel properties. So here you see a picture of a self-assembled structure in a living cell, in a biological cell, and on the right-hand side you see a self-assembled structure formed by gold nanorods. So this is an electron microscope image, and so this is the endoplasmic. So this is the wall of the ribosomes. Ribosome is a component of living cell which is responsible for synthesizing proteins, and you can see they have been assembled in such a beautiful packed manner. And if we understand, how nature designs such beautiful self-assemblies in a confined environment of about microns in size, and with an environment which is crowded, which is like a soup, it's a crowded milieu of a lot of macromolecules. You can see it's a big, crowded, confined solution. If we can understand how this happens naturally, and then we can use those fundamental ideas to translate them into materials, is what our work is about. So we ask two main questions: how self-assemblies occur inside a living cell, and how macromolecules compact inside a living cell. So as I said, a living cell is a very crowded environment. And here I show a cartoon picture of a cell where you can see the numbers represent the number of atoms and molecules of a particular biomolecule or the component of the living cell. So as you can see here, it's a ribosome, which if you want to model a ribosome, for example, it will consist of atoms of the order of 10,000. And then there is DNA inside the nucleus, which has of million base pairs. Then there are proteins, which consist of millions of atoms. There are lipids. There are water molecules, which are the order of 10 to the power 10. So, and all this happens inside, as I said, a very confined volume of size of micrometers. So, how do the natural self-assembly processes occur inside such a complicated environment, such a complex environment, is what is still not understood. So here, the cytoplasm, or the liquid soup of the cell, as you can say, is consisting of small molecules like urea, TMAO, and then there are crowders. So all these big structures, or big macromolecules like sugar, like lipids, like proteins, they act like crowders because they are crowding the environment inside the living cell. So what is interesting about this environment, which is still not understood, is that you can imagine the picture inside a living cell to be like a crowded swimming pool. Now, as you can see, in a crowded swimming pool, there are a lot of people, and then there is very less free water. The water does not move as freely as would move in a dilute solution, or in a beaker, or in a test tube when you do experiments. So that makes the properties of water also very different inside the living cell. For example, the dielectric constant of water, which is responsible for making it a very good polar solvent for dissolving polar solutes, actually decreases. So that means water does not remain as polar as it would be in a free solution, a dilute solution. Then the dynamics between the people inside the crowded swimming pool will be very less. Similarly, the dynamics of these biomolecules inside the living cell reduces. And when the dynamics reduce, you can imagine that the reactions or the self-assembly processes will be highly affected. Then you can imagine that the people inside the living this swimming pool would be having a lot of interactions amongst themselves, and also the volume that one person occupies does not allow another person to come in that volume in the swimming pool. So that's called solvent excluded volume, okay? And that's called volume exclusion. So that's a very, very important principle in physics, which is responsible for causing self-assembly processes in such environments, because the volume occupied by a certain solute or certain macromolecule does not allow the other crowders or other small molecules inside the living cell to occupy that volume. So the properties inside the living cell are much, much different as what would you expect in a dilute solution. And in terms of computation also, this environment is quite complex, not only in terms of the scientific relevance or physical properties, but also in terms of computational efficiencies. Because if you want to model such a system with all, for example, all atom system with millions of atoms and molecules, and the time scale that you would require, the computing power that you would require is of exascale order. But right now, our force field models or the simulations that we work with, especially the molecular simulations, they are actually just dilute solutions. So you can consider, like, in a box of a simulation, we just consider one protein, one polymer chain, or two or 3 max. And then there are some small inorganic or organic solutes inside the cell, inside the box. So the current understanding is quite limited, and we really need to account for such crowding effects in order to understand the complete behavior of such molecules in a crowded environment. So you can imagine that now we are at the scale of peta or tera scale of computing, and we really need to jump to an exascale. Exascale is 10 to the power 18, peta scale is 10 to the power 15. So what are the computational challenges? Why till now, the crowded solutions have not been studied? Why are we just dealing with dilute solutions? That's because, as I said, we do not have good models, because when there are a lot of biomolecules or macromolecules packed in a solution, the attractive interactions between these molecules increase, okay? And our models, or the force field models, as we call in molecular simulations, they have been developed keeping in mind dilute solutions. So there are some challenges that have to be overcome in that scenario in order to accurately model such an environment. The second is that the system sizes are quite large. So till now, now we have good technology to simulate such systems, or think about simulating such systems. But back 10 years back then there was not such much technology available. So we have to now simulate system sizes with millions of 10 to the power 7 atoms, you can say, or 10 million atoms, which is a huge number. Then if you want to study such systems, you need good sampling. So if you need good statistical averages out of these systems, you need to sample these systems enough or long enough and collect enough snapshots for averaging. And that requires long simulation times. Also, if you're studying biological processes or self-assembly processes, you have to simulate at the biological time scales, which is of the order of microseconds. So that is also computationally very expensive. Then the fourth challenge, which is not very, these days, it's also quite relevant, is the data that is generated out of these simulations. They'll be huge. For example, if you want to study viscosity changes or diffusion changes in such an environment, you require to store the velocities of the atoms at very frequent intervals, and that increases your data generatable space that it would take to a huge amount. And for that, not only that, the second challenge along with that is to how to analyze such data. Once you have such a big data, how can we modify our in-house codes for analysis, maybe make them more GPU enabled, CUDA enabled, and more efficient on GPUs, or use hybrid parallelization schemes to make them more efficient, is also one more challenge that we have to cater to. So this is just a cartoon picture to show that how a crowded system would look like with 10 million atoms, and right now we are at a very dilute solution stage. Okay, so this is something we have faced challenges till now in computational aspect. So just to make some of the audience, if you're not aware of molecular dynamics simulations, I just want to show you in very simplified picture how molecular dynamics simulations take place, and what is the basic steps in the algorithm that are followed, and where do we recognize the computational bottleneck. So molecular dynamics is based on solving Newton's second law of motion, because we assume that the particles or the atoms that we are modeling or that we want to study are classical in nature. So we are more interested to understand the nuclear. So if you imagine in terms of the Hamiltonian, there's an electronic component to the Hamiltonian, then there is a nuclear component to the Hamiltonian, and we are more interested to understand the nuclear motion because of Born-Oppenheimer approximation. And also, so second law of equation, Newton's second law of equation of motion is actually force is equal to mass multiplied by acceleration. But now if you talk in terms of particles or the atoms, we can say that the force acting on particle I will be equal to the mass of that particle multiplied by the acceleration of that particle. And if you write this in terms of positions of these atoms, we can always convert this acceleration as, or you write acceleration as the second differential of position with time. So this equation becomes a second order differential equation. Now you would say that, why is it so complicated? We can use numerical methods that are available to solve ordinary differential equations. It's a second order differential equation. We can use some algorithms and solve it. But it's not so simple, because these equations are just not second order differential equations, but these are coupled differential equations. Because here, these forces, what do these represent? These forces represent how the atoms are interacting with each other. The particles are interacting with each other. And if one particle moves because of its interaction with the other, that may be, say, dispersive interactions or electrostatic interactions or some bond, they have a bond between them, or whatever kind of interactions it is that. So if one moves, the other also changes its position accordingly. That's why the motion of one of the atoms coupled with the other, that's why these equations are coupled equations, and they are, if you say in 3 dimensions for n particles, this becomes 6n. So you need positions and the velocity. So this kind of becomes a 6n dimensional space that you have to sample. So these equations are not so simple to solve. So what we do, we use certain kind of algorithm. So first, what we need to define is that we begin with an initial configuration of the system with initial positions and velocities. Then we have defined certain kind of interactions between these systems. They can be bonded interactions or non-bonded interactions. And among the non-bonded, there are electrostatic interactions as well. So force can also be written as the negative differential of the potential energy. So here, the force acting on particle I is the negative gradient of the potential energy. There should be I, or the position of I actually, interacting with the jth particles. These are all pair interactions mostly that we consider. So keeping in mind that this force is dependent upon the position and the velocities, and also is defined by the way the potential energy is defined, we can actually solve these equations. And then we have, as I said, we have certain algorithms like Worley velocity, Worley integrators, basically, which can integrate such equations of motion and get the new forces. So once you have force at time step, first time step, you do this procedure step by step, and then you go to the next step, okay, and then you keep on updating the positions and the velocities of these atoms as they move, as the dynamics of the system evolve with time because of the interactions between the particles. But now, if you're talking about crowded systems, which are of the order of 10 to the power 7 atoms or molecules, which are huge number of interactions. So, so you can imagine that if this loop goes in 3 dimensions, then it will be an n cube loop, because you are calculating the forces for the pairs of the atoms for n number of atoms. So this is like an n cube loop, and it's quite expensive computationally to do that. So the bottleneck here lies between the at the steps where you compute the non-bonded forces, the electrostatic interactions, and then storing the configurations and then running it for a very long time. So we have these MD packages which are open source. They come with good parallelization schemes. So how do we really make it efficient? So some of the packages now are making helping in speed ups by first step. What we can do is, when we are defining the initial configuration of the system or the initial position of the atoms in the system, when we start this algorithm, we say that we use domain decomposition. That means if you have n number of particles, you say that one set of the particles will be the forces between them will be computed on, say, the 2 cores, and then the next set of particles will be computed on the next 2 cores on your node, and then another 2 cores, and so on. So you can use, say, 16 cores, for example, for a simulation, or 24 cores for a simulation. Then the load of the computation of these forces is not done by all the 24 cores together, but you distribute them in different domains. And at the end of the computation, at this step where the forces are already computed, all the data is collected from all the cores, and then the new forces are generated using integration of equations of motion. So this is called domain decomposition, which makes the computations faster. It's more like, as in the other talks we saw on the first day, we talked about one of the talks talked about Okra, how we can cut Okra in different. So this is like task level parallelism, or we also call it sometimes thread level parallelism, where you are actually distributing the load of your computation to different cores at the same time. And the other way to make it faster is by offloading your computation, which are expensive computationally, to GPUs. So usually we compute electrostatic forces in these codes and the MD packages on the GPUs. And also we can use some new packages are available, like Genesis, which is developed by UG Sugita group, and they have made use of these hybrid schemes, parallelization schemes, to make it more scalable to 10 to the power 7 million, or the order of 10 to the power 7 million, 7 atoms or molecules of the system. So these are some of the ways where you can make your computation faster on HPC, using HPC. Now, what is the problem that we're trying to understand? So I'll give you a brief overview of what is the theoretical background that we are trying to tackle here, okay? So that you can appreciate how HPC can, help in understanding such a problem. So as I said that if you are trying to understand self-assembly between molecules or macromolecules in a biological environment, it is a very famous problem of colloidal physics. So in 1950s, Asakura and Osawa, they were studying how colloids can associate with each other in an environment which is crowded by polymers, certain kind of polymers. So here you see that the blue spheres are the colloids for whose association we are trying to study, and the black chains are the polymers which are crowding the solution. So when these two colloids, they come together, so you see these dotted spheres, they are actually the excluded volume of the sphere. So as I was telling you before, because the volume that this big sphere occupies in the solution, or two big spheres occupy when they are far apart, it's much larger, because of which the other small polymers around them, they are restricted to not occupy that particular volume occupied by the blue spheres. So when they come together, so when these blue spheres come together, there is an overlap in the volume, solvent excluded volume, that pink region that you see. So there's an overlap in this solid volume, because of which the total volume that now these two spheres occupy on binding to each other is much less than when they were far apart. And when they come together, this has to deplete some of the polymers that were in the solvation shells of these colloids. And when they deplete, these two colloids, they are getting attracted to each other. So it's called depletion attraction. And once they get attracted or associated, then there is large volume, or what we say in statistical mechanics, configurational volume available for the black polymer chains to occupy. And this leads to higher entropy. So I'm talking about Boltzmann entropy, statistical entropy, how you can define it as that how many arrangements. So the larger the number of arrangements possible for certain particles in a system, the larger is the entropy. So once the two colloids have associated, the polymer chains have more space to occupy, move around more freely, and that leads to more possible arrangements and therefore higher entropy. And we all know by second law of thermodynamics, if a process leads to an increase in the entropy, then there is the process is highly favorable. So this is what the theory was all about, given by Asakura Osawa. But the major assumption in this theory was that the Crowder molecules do not interact with the colloids. So the black chains have no attractive interactions with the blue spheres. They only have hard sphere interactions, or what we call repulsive interactions. So this effect of depletion interaction, which is entirely entropic in nature, is arising because of the size of the blue and the black chains. Okay, it's just a size effect. There is no there are no soft interactions, only there are hard interactions because of the size of these molecules. But is it completely true? If we have to, and this theory has been used to also explain crowding effects on assemblies of biomolecules or collapse of biomolecules. But is this completely true in a biological environment? Can we really ignore the attractive interactions between the different sugars or lipids or other macromolecules which are present in the crowded environment? Is it the correct assumption to be taken care of? So recent studies have shown that the collapse of biomolecules, the crowding environment may not necessarily always cause collapse of biomolecules, and it may not always be entropic in nature. There can be soft interactions that can lead to collapse or unfolding of these biomolecules as well. So here on the left-hand side, you can see there was an experimental study where they showed the protein unfolded in presence of crowded environment. So instead of folding, which is what is expected in a natural scenario, here an unfolding was observed for the protein, and that was also entropic in nature. Then there was a second study. They also showed unfolding of proteins. So these on the x and the y-axis are the size parameters of proteins, and the size of the protein increased as the concentration. This is the largest C5, the largest concentration of the crowders. So this indicated that crowded environment can lead to, not necessarily always lead to collapse of biomolecules, but can also lead to unfolding of the Also, still now, many studies have been carried out with crowding environment where the crowders are modeled as ellipsoids, big ellipsoids or big spheres, without considering the chemical nature of the crowders. Because assuming Asakura-Osawa theory, only size effects are important, so you can really coarse grain the chemical nature. But is that the correct assumption? Because these models will not be able to capture the biological environment fully. So how do we tackle this problem is what now arises. So we try to model, in our work, we try to model this crowded environment. And the way we can do that is, so this is a simplified picture again. You can imagine the crowded environment like a traffic jam, where you are trying to understand how these two white vans will come close to each other in this jam-packed environment. So this environment can be related to that the red one are the vans that we're trying to study, and the small gray spheres are actually the small cars. So here the size of the crowder is much less than the size of the macromolecule whose association you're trying to understand. Then there can be another scenario where you're trying to understand how this red car moves in the, it diffuses inside a living cell or in a crowded jam-packed environment. And there the size of the cars is same as this size. So the size of the crowder is similar to that of the macromolecule that we're trying to understand. And the third scenario can be that there can be a very big truck, that is stuck in the middle of the road and causes the whole traffic jam. And this scenario is more like the crowder is a very large macromolecule, which is much larger in size than the macromolecule whose association we're trying to understand. So these are the three ways we can model the crowded environment. And you can see the concentration of the crowders is decreasing as you go from left to right because the size is increasing. So basically what we say is the packing fraction. The packing fraction is high, that is a crowded environment. So we try to understand using model A in our work, and we ask these questions that, does macromolecular crowding always induce collapse of the biomolecules? And what is the role of the size effects as well as the attractive interactions in the system? Can we completely ignore them or are they important? So to understand this better, a few more concepts. So what we try to understand is so here we will see how an extended chain of macromolecule collapses inside a crowded environment. And to understand that, we try to understand the solvation thermodynamics associated with that. So here you can see that I have made an animation of how you can actually solvate a solute in solution. It's a very simple process. It's a two-step process, you can imagine, that you are taking a solute from the gas phase and you're inserting that in the solution. So when it has to be inserted in the solution, there is some space that has to be created in the solution. And that is this cavity formation step, which involves creating a cavity equivalent to the size of the solute. And to create this cavity, the solvent molecules have to move apart. That means there are repulsive interaction between the solute and the solvent. And once the solute enters the solution, the solvent reorganizes around the solute, and then there are attractive interactions kind of switched on, and then the solvent solvates the solute. So this process of transferring, the reversible work done to transfer the solute from one phase, gas phase, to the solution phase is called the chemical potential. It's the free energy basically, and it has two components. It will have the energetic component and the entropic component, but here we call this as a solute solvent energy, and the entropy is called the fluctuation entropy, the solute solvent entropy. So this fluctuation entropy is more like, when the solute is actually inside the solvent, there are certain kind of solvent density fluctuations around the solute, which is a measure of the entropy in the system. Okay, so this is a microscopic dissection of the free energy, because this is not the total enthalpy, thermodynamic enthalpy, or total entropic contribution, thermodynamic entropy that you always see when you have delta G is equal to delta H minus G delta S. So here, what we try to understand is, we want to understand that there's a coil of a polymer and how it collapses inside the crowded environment. So this can be imagined like a cycle, thermodynamic cycle. So what you want to understand is, what is the free energy change when the polymer collapses? That means goes from the coil state to the globule state, that is delta G C to G in water. But now instead of water, you add some crowders in the solution. There's a third component in the solution, because of which now this is another delta G that you will have to compute, right? And if you want to find the total free energy change when how the collapse the free energy change of collapse of the polymer in water versus in the crowded solution, then you just have to subtract these two delta G's, which will become delta delta G, right? But this is a little more complicated to solve. What we do is we can also look at the vertical picture. So what is the free energy of transferring a coil from water phase to the crowded phase? And what is the free energy or the chemical potential change associated with transferring the globule from water to the crowded solution? And if you subtract these two delta mu's, you will get delta delta mu. So this is Wyman-Canford model given in 1960. So usually doing the vertical picture is much easier with simulations than the horizontal picture. So for polymer solubility, finally, we have this chemical potential change plus some conformational degrees of freedom when the polymer changes its conformation that will come into the picture, and that we also add to this chemical potential change. And this is how so we assume that the polymer is in equilibrium in between the two states. And when you change the chemical environment, it can either go to the left or it can go to the right. Okay. So this was the theoretical background that you require to understand the problem. And now how do we simulate this problem using HPC? So how can HPC help with this? Okay, so this is our problem, is a theory that we have. And just to show you that HPC has come a long way. The computing technology that we have has come a long way, because in in 1970s, actually, long back, there was a time when we could only simulate 1,000 atom molecules, say a small protein, with just 8 picoseconds of run length, which is a very short run length to actually get a good statistical average. And then slowly, as the time proceeded and technology increased, we could go from 10 to the power 4, 10 to the power 6, and finally now today we can actually simulate the whole HIV virus. So even now we can also do SARS-CoV. You can see that SARS-CoV-2 and studies have, the computation studies have really, contributed in last 1 year. You can see how much the computational studies have made a big difference in understanding how COVID virus is attacking the cells. So if you want to really understand such problems of collapse and, it's kind of, you're sampling the polymer conformations in a landscape, because a polymer, so a protein can be in a very unfolded state and can be in a folded state. But when it is in a folded state, it is a very fixed structure, native structure. It has a unique structure. So if you want to, for example, in these are the slides from one of the workshops of NAMD package, and very nice one. So I just took it from there. So if you're trying to understand how a protein and the ligand bind or protein enzyme reaction happens, you want to study the protein and then the ligand binding to it. And if you really want to understand this process, you have to run the simulations for a very long time. And even if with a very powerful supercomputing machine, Anton in US, even if you use that, and you are even able to run 100 nanoseconds per day, which is a huge simulation time for a day, even then you would require to understand the whole binding of, you need 5 years to actually sample if you run only one simulation, a long one over a long period of time. And that means if you are want to study more ligands, more types of ligands binding to such a protein, say 5 more ligands you want to study, that means for each PhD time frame that you have, one PhD will run only one ligand for 5 years, and that's all. But this is not what we want, right? This is something which is very unsmart to do. Okay, we want to be more smart in our ways of sampling such complicated problems. So increase sampling so that we get good statistical efficiencies and also have better computational efficiency. So what do we do? How do we speed up the process? Somebody can say, okay, you want to, so basically it's a landscape that you are sampling. You are so each of the conformation of the protein, when it goes from an unfolded state to a folded state, is not one-step process. It undergoes a lot of conformational changes, and these different conformations, which are still unfolded, will occupy certain energy minima in the landscape. So landscape has hills and the valleys, right? So these valleys are the local energy minima where the protein likes to sit for some time, but that's not the most stable stage. Okay, so in order to sample all this, you have to jump over the hills and go to the next valley, then jump over another hill and go to the next valley, and so on. And once you have sampled all the valleys, then you have a good statistical picture of how the protein unfolds or folds. So one can say that, just heat it up, provide heat, increase the temperature so that the barrier can be crossed. But that is not something what we want, because if you heat the chicken, it will become something else. So your live chicken is not same as heating roasted chicken. So this is an unnatural perturbation of the system, which we do not want. So we make use of enhanced sampling methods. So for example, as I said, you want to push this ball from one valley to the other, one local energy minimum to the other. You put an additional force on this, which we call the bias potential. So one is the forces of interaction that we had studied when we just talked about, when we have talked about the MD algorithm. And to this natural forces of interaction, you add additional force. It's like a spring, a harmonic potential, you add a harmonic force, you add. This spring pulls this up from one valley to the other. And this way, you can actually, these are called umbrella sampling. So these are potentials like harmonic potentials, and you will see you can put these harmonic potentials at different steps and make this ball push. Each of the energy minima will be occupied by the ball, and the ball will actually jump over the barrier. So this is something what we usually do, but this is called umbrella because here you can see it's an inverted umbrella and harmonic potential looks like that. So finally, for example, if you want to pull the polymer chain or you want to bring it back, what you do is you define a coordinate end-to-end distance, and you pull the end-to-end distance or radius of gyration at each step. And you put a bias that you want to sample each size of the resulting size of the polymer when the end-to-end distance is changed from, say, A to B, okay? And this is like going from A to B. And in between, you have all these different simulations. So at each bias that you will put, you will run one simulation. And these are, say, 20 or 50 simulation windows from going from A to B, from going from this end-to-end distance to a collapsed end-to-end distance. So these are called simulation windows, or once you have them, once you run these independent simulations, what you get, so you have one umbrella, you run a simulation, you prepare a probability distribution of sampling this size of the polymer, and that gives you part of the potential of mean force. So finally, what you get is a free energy change of collapsing or unfolding the polymer, and that's what we call potential of mean force, PMF. And each of the window will give you one component of this PMF. And finally, you will see that you have sampled the whole landscape of this polymer and going from the collapsed state to the extended state. So this is what we do in umbrella sampling simulation, and HPC can actually help in running these so many windows. These can be each simulation can be of the run length of 50 nanoseconds, 100 nanoseconds, and so if you sum up all the run lengths, you will actually get the full simulation time scale of microseconds. So HPC can really help in doing these kind of simulations. So now finally, what do we obtain? We saw that there was a problem that we were trying to understand. We were trying to understand how crowded environment actually affects, say, the collapse of a macromolecule. And we understood that there's a theory behind it which has been followed till now, which only takes into consideration the size of the crowders and the polymer, and there are no attractive interactions that have been considered. So we want to understand whether there are attractive interactions playing the role or not, and does the polymer always collapse in such an environment? And we do umbrella sampling simulations, and we consider a very simple polymer. This is a 32-mer Lennard-Jones beads. This polymer only interacts, there are no charges, it only interacts via dispersive van der Waals interactions with the other components of the solution. And this polymer is hydrophobic in nature, because of which it can only exist in two states, either a very collapsed state and an extended state. So the landscape of this, as I was telling you, is very simple. This one has a very deep minimum here for the collapsed state in water, and another deep minimum as the extended state in water. So with this nice simplified picture, we want only two-state picture because we want to understand what is the field change in going from extended state to the collapsed state. And this is a crowded solution. Here the crowders that we consider, the model A that I told you of the traffic jam, where the crowders are much lesser in size than the polymer. And that's how you can see this is around 26% of packing fraction, and inside a living cell you have 30% of packing fraction. So this is close to what we want a very crowded solution. And we run umbrella sampling simulations using Bromax, and the total run length is around 3 microseconds. But what we do here is we tune the interaction of the crowder with the polymer. These are van der Waals interaction, but in one case we make them weak, in the other case we make them strong, because we want to see what is the effect of attractive interaction. So these are all atom systems, but this is a simplified polymer, and this is an all-atom tripeptides or trialanine we use to mimic a biological environment. And what we find is very interesting, if you just compute the PMF, or just take from the PMFs that you do, at each concentration you have a 1 PMF profile, and from there you get these delta G's, and if you plot them as a function of concentration of the crowders, what you see is that what we expected was that a crowded environment will always collapse polymer, okay, as you increase the concentration of crowders. But what we see here at a high concentration of crowders, which is actually a crowded environment, the polymer unfolds. And this is the case where the polymer is interacting, or the crowders are interacting strongly with the polymer, and it unfolds, which is something surprising. Only it collapses at low concentrations of crowders, but at high concentration it unfolds. And also we do not see any depletion of the crowders like in our Asakura-Osawa model. Here there is the collapse of the polymer is happening, but the crowders are nicely sitting and absorbing on the polymer surface. They are what we call preferentially bound to the surface by calculating this parameter using simulations. And in the weakly interacting case, where the crowders are weakly interacting with the crowders, we see that the polymer always collapses. And when the polymer always collapses, this is what we had expected. And also here, there is depletion of the crowders. The crowders do not like to absorb on the polymer surface. So this is something very interesting. So we went into more thermodynamic analysis, which I'm not showing you here. And what we found was also that the entropy and the enthalpy play a very different role in both the cases. So what we have found are some new insights into the already known Asakura-Osawa theory, although our system is very simplified and it is not as complex as biological system. But as a first step, we found something interesting with such a simple system also, that crowding effects may not always lead to collapse. When you have strong interaction between the crowder and the polymer in picture, which is also expected in a biological environment, then unfolding can happen. Unfolding is also possible. It may not always lead to compact structures. And also we found that the role of the attractive interaction energy should not be ignored between the crowders and the polymers. The size effects are important, but along with that, the interaction energies also should be considered. So we have also studying other problems. So you could see that with HPC, you can really it enables us to zoom into the molecular level picture of such processes, and then we can actually provide new insights to the already known understanding of the field. Okay, so then we are also working on different other problems, like we are trying to understand how addition of certain co-solvents actually change the conformational preferences of thermoresponsive polymers, and we are also using some other enhanced sampling methods to understand how proteins form these fibril stacked self-assembled structures, which are actually a cause of neurodegenerative diseases in our body. And here, this was a paper where we used metadynamic simulation, another enhanced sampling method, along with umbrella sampling simulations. And then recently, we have also got a grant from NSM, where we are trying to understand how crowding can help in designing self-assembled structures of nanoparticles. So these are some of the interesting problems that one can work with HPC, with availability of HPC and some nice simulation tools. And I hope that I have been able to give you this picture of how simulations can act as a very good tool along with the assistance of HPC, and what all nice things we can understand out of it. Okay, finally, I would like to now thank the funding agencies, DST for the grant, and IIT Kharagpur and IIT Delhi for the seed grants, that we bought a few servers and ran some simulations using that. And I also, last but not the least, thank the organizers of the workshop again for giving me this chance to show my work, and I hope I have helped the students to understand they should be able to appreciate how HPC can be really a powerful tool for understanding very interesting scientific problems. Thank you. Now I will be happy to take some questions.